Good evening, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Quentin Kopp, chair of the Society and son of George Kopp, who you may well have read about in Homage to Catalonia. It's a great pleasure tonight to introduce you to Glenn Ibbitson, who's been curating a show with Orwell-inspired artworks for a few years now. And he's going to talk you through some of these wonderful works and explain how it's all come about. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, Quentin. I'll just get this sorted out. Right. Is that working for everybody?
Yeah, that's fine.
Right, okay. Right, ladies and gentlemen, fellow citizens, when I was a student in the late 70s, George Orwell's writings were a fixture in the English lit curriculum. I hope they still are. Back then, there was a sense that all the battles Orwell had engaged in had, with the exception of the Cold War itself, been won. This was an illusion, as we can now see. Orwell's observations are as pertinent now as they ever were. Evidence for his continued relevance in our social and political discourse is the way his name crops up unprompted in media conversations on a weekly and sometimes daily basis. It may be misused by people who are referencing anything remotely dystopian or antisocial, but for me, that still provides some valuable measure of the length of shadow this man's work throws across the landscape of contemporary thought. The price of democracy and free speech is constant vigilance. As an artist, I believe that the visual arts can be a powerful instrument against the encroaching forces which would seek to dismantle it. I suppose one of the reasons people refer to Orwell in reference to my art is that the themes I pursue invite the comparison. I have always tended to root for the underdog. Finding myself somewhat isolated at art school, my subject became the anonymous figure with biographical overtones. Deviating from the norm, head bowed, avoiding locked eye contact with any viewer. That figure has remained my central subject matter to the present day. I now tend to focus my work on subjects which Orwell interrogated through his writings: surveillance, state controls, homelessness, corporate influence, restrictions on individual liberty, limitations on thought. When artists spend more time at a private view discussing George Orwell than the work on display, a visual tribute to this giant of modern thought is overdue. I therefore decided 4 years ago to test the waters and propose a tribute to him. This would take the form of an online gallery blog where like-minded artists could display any work reflecting Orwellian themes. From the beginning, I saw this as a virtual window display to attract the attention of a bricks and mortar gallery. I called it Room 103. The title comes from the layout of BBC Broadcasting House. Orwell's wartime broadcasts to India emanated from Room 101. I thought I had read in one biography that arts broadcasts were delivered from a room 2 doors down the corridor. Now, this may or may not actually be true. I have since found no firm verification for this, but it does provide the project with a catchy title. Reference to Orwell's work makes for a very wide brief open to interpretation. Exactly the intellectual circumstances artists respond to. The project began to draw the attention of a wide range of painters, printmakers, sculptors, photographers, and more recently, poets and performers. Preliminary discussions with fellow artists identified several areas of our contemporary world which carry with them what may be termed Orwellian overtones. 1. Systems of surveillance in both public and private spaces. 2. Character profiling through the process of online information gathering, which is often surrendered unknowingly and or voluntarily. 3, the insidiousness of the advertising and marketing industries, which provided the background for personal revolt in Keep the Aspidistra Flying. 4, the provision of cyber prole food, online pornography, gambling and wall-to-wall sports coverage with which to blunt any appetite for constructive social change. And 5, the continued desecration of the environment, which provides the backdrop of coming up for air. I imposed no limit on the field of activity. Traditional techniques could be presented alongside time-based media. A brief statement on how Orwell has had an influence on an artist's practice in general, or project in particular, accompanies the images. Up to this moment, the open doors of Room 103 have attracted the diverse work of 34 artists. The first was artist and educationalist Tony Baker. I met him at the 21st International Contemporary Book Art Fair in Leeds in 2017. He presented his recent collection, Homage to Catalonia. This is a book of 297 images that contrast Orwell's observations captured in the middle of the Civil War with that of a present-day Catalonia, which at the time of publication was in the process of reassessing its identity through an independence referendum which had been declared illegal by the Spanish government. Our first international entry came from a student of Tony's in Barcelona, Anthony Garcia Serrat. He writes, "Although I read George Orwell, I am not an expert on his work. As a Catalan citizen, I am very thankful to him for aiding the fight against fascism and for his work Homage to Catalonia, especially in these moments in which our rights as a country are threatened. The imagery he presents evokes an unquantifiable menace, stalking his nation's past and present. Interior spaces where corridors and staircases disappear into deep shadow, where bad things can happen." There is no such room for conjectures with the film Boot by Kerry Baldry. The bad thing is already happening, and it's happening to you, the viewer. If you want a vision of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. Shot from a subjective viewpoint, the viewer only sees the underside of the jackboot, occasionally stamping noisily and viciously through 1 minute and 25 seconds of blank screen. Nigel Pugh used a job as an aerial photographer to both finance his art and provide it with source material for his map-like coastal scapes. Though the archetypal eye-in-the-sky surveiller, he is quick to assert that after reading Animal Farm as a young teenager, I have always been on Snowball's side. In his recognition number 1, he was inspired by a recent news story of a man mistakenly arrested because his face was matched by facial recognition technology to a known villain, with all the attendant Orwell overtones that carries. The original source was a charcoal pastel drawing. It has had a technological digital makeover to produce a half-tone dot-to-dot identikit. Gary Barker is also investigating digital visual techniques, describing his art as a weapon against data mining and psychological profiling, developing sophisticated social control systems and buttressed by a fear-mongering media in which words no longer mean what they used to mean. Politicians and big business can say one thing and mean quite another. They can define our realities. This dark period of our history will need its images, and if they are the right ones, perhaps they might help in a late rearguard action designed to remind the world of once cherished ideals that are now being sold off in the media frenzy of late capitalism. Liam Ainscott's installations comprise omnipresent surveillance drones over cityscapes, constantly monitoring the populace below. The use of CCTV has, in recent years, been introduced under the guise of security, but it comes at a price, as the UK becomes the most watched state in the world. According to a British Security Industry Authority report of July 2013, Britain had a CCTV camera for every 11 people. A staggering 5.9 million closed-circuit television cameras have been installed in the country since the 1980s. After 9/11 and the emerging threat to Westerners from extremist groups, there has been a conscious effort by the controlling states to have surveillance less in the shadows and more on display as an indicator of public security. Surveillance to protect democracy? Well, Krasimira Butseva's work shows where such concepts have led us once before. She deals with the rewriting of history and the camps detaining dissident voices behind the Iron Curtain. During my master's degree at the University of Portsmouth, I began working on a project about the forced labour camps from the communist era in my native Bulgaria. This interested me because I had never known previously of their existence. This was excluded from the history textbooks when I studied there and was not talked about. I began visiting the locations where these tragedies took place. Various landscapes, untouched since the closure of the camps, left much as they were, reverting to nature. I also met with survivors from the camps who shared their experiences and recounted how they managed to survive. People used to be imprisoned for listening to Western music, wearing jeans, or telling a political joke, which made me think even more of 1984 and a specific quote from Orwell. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 makes 4. If that is granted, all else follows. Monique Martin uses structures in nature to explore human interactions. I made large-scale prints into an environment which invites the viewer to walk into a hive and experience the life of a bee. The installation also includes the sound of an active beehive, as well as the smell using beeswax. The point is to challenge the viewer to consider how important bees are to humans and how we must do more to protect them. The installation is a progression from healthy beehive frames at the beginning, but ends with a dead frame, complete colony collapse, and the bees die. I found this submission particularly moving, especially as I was rereading Coming Up for Air. This time round, Orwell's concern for the desecration of the natural environment by unregulated development read like a precursor to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Claire Ferguson Walker's sculptures investigate similar territory, but through more oblique and surreal imagery. Her human-animal chimera exists as in an Orwellian dystopian universe. Sorrowful Siren plays a mournful song about the chaos an uncaring human force has left on her ocean environment. Susanna Oliver, in her work A Spoonful of Ignorance, rails against a willful misrepresentation of our imperial past. Coal wasn't the only substance that drove Britain's industrial revolution. Sugar provided the fuel for economic expansion, and its manufacture necessitated the crime against humanity, which was the slave trade. Here, the tripod and the 3 chains made of bent spoons echo the triangular trade route across the Atlantic, and the pot of gold at its apex is a sugar bowl. Orwell would have known very well the history of the sugar dissolving in his tea. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that the last 4 works we have seen are by women artists. Because both Orwell and Hemingway bore witness to the conflict in Spain, one as a reporter, the other as a combatant, they have become closely linked in some literary circles. I was concerned that Hemingway's resolutely macho reputation would adversely affect the feminist view of Orwell. I need not have worried. The women contributing to Room 103 have proved the equals of their male counterparts, both intellectually and aesthetically. This painting I called Barcode 6079 Smith W. It is something of a personal appeal against the perpetual erosion of self-worth and dignity. Here is the individual depersonalized and assigned a barcode, like any other off-the-shelf commodity, assigned a value set by market forces. How much easier it then becomes for developed society to exploit that individual for both its economic and sexual requirements. Humanity consumed like any other expendable, imported or trafficked produce. Barcode was one of two works I exhibited in the touring New Light Art Show, which launched at Bowes Museum in 2017. It was here that I met gallery owners Catherine and Ian Hay. I had seen them looking at the work, and its obscure title allowed me to introduce myself with an explanation. As with so many conversations over the past couple of years, this one turned from the exhibition on view to the subject of Orwell's journalism and its influence on contemporary thought and culture. The possibility of collaborating on a themed exhibition was left hanging in the air as we exchanged email addresses and goodbyes. And the following spring, Ian messaged me, inviting me to visit the gallery to discuss a showing of work comprising a selection from Room 103. The Saul Hay Gallery is a fairly new addition to the Manchester Arts Map, so it was only as I approached the premises that I realised just how significant a location this would be for a tribute to Orwell. On one side of the gallery is the terminus basin of the Bridgewater Canal, one of the early catalysts igniting the Industrial Revolution. On the other, a viaduct which carried the world's first passenger railway from Manchester to Liverpool, confirming the development of urbanisation. The problems arising from these two related phenomena provided Orwell with the material for his lifetime of writing and journalism. Railway Cottage is a handsome Victorian red brick building of the type Orwell would have been familiar with as he filled notebooks with observations on the way to Wigan, though the accumulation of half a century's industrial grime may have masked their simple elegance from him at that time. High on the front wall of Railway Cottage is a clock. It doesn't strike 13, but I think Orwell might be taken by the notion that at this venue, the time is always 6 minutes before 6. While preparations for the show took place, I was invited by Professor Tim Crook of the Orwell Society to present a talk on Room 103 at the 3rd George Orwell Studies Conference at Goldsmiths, University of London. This provided me with an ideal opportunity to advertise the first actual exhibition to a specialised audience. Each artist showing at Manchester mobilised their own social media to advertise the exhibition and recruit other artists by word of screen. I encouraged each participating artist to design their own e-poster for the show, tailored to their tastes of their own online audience of followers. This meant that the accumulation of publicity would directly reflect the diversity of the exhibits in the gallery. The show preview was very well attended and was opened by Richard Blair with Quentin Kopp in attendance. This is my favourite photo from that evening. It was taken by one of the online reviewers of the exhibition. Advance notice of their presence at the event had encouraged the local online art press to give the show positive coverage. This in turn led to Saul Hay's highest show footfall up to that time, with corresponding positive feedback. including an organised event by the Friends of Manchester's Whitworth Art Gallery. Quite a result for the Sol Hay, and they are now firmly established on the Manchester cultural map. I'm pleased to say that they have weathered our recent periods of lockdown and are continuing to present challenging artwork to an appreciative and expanding audience. They are also now representing several artists from the 103 project on a permanent basis. Every northerner knows that one needs to treat the Rose counties with careful even-handedness. Tony Baker arranged with Studio 24 in Leeds for the show to follow shortly after the Manchester closing date, so that I could bring all the selected work across the Pennines in one journey, instead of sending the work back to the artists and then asking for it back in a month's time or so. Note to self, arrange more shows like this which run concurrently. Studio 24 provided a high contrast venue to the neat white space of Sol Hay, housed in an industrial building of the type with which Orwell would have been familiar from his journeys through the north, including Leeds itself, where he wrote up some of his notes for Wigan Pier. The interior was a satisfying matrix of whitewashed brick barrel vaults, girder work, and exposed conduit and pipes. After nearly 90 years, this still feels like Orwell country. In his position as lecturer at Beckett University, Tony set an Orwell module for his students to follow. 7 of them were invited to show with us. Their work provided a satisfying direct counterpoint to the rather more obscure or nuanced contributions from the established artists. It confirmed, if proof was still needed, that Orwell can speak across time to all generations. Tony also introduced new artists based in Leeds to the project. Jonathan Turner presented large-scale photographs from an odyssey of his own, which shadowed Orwell's investigations into the English people's pastimes, recounted in England, Your England. He accessed university monitors for screening the time-based media, and he designed publicity and arranged for its printing. Drawing on his musical background, heading his own band called Poom, he extended an invitation to Commoners Choir to perform at the preview. Their following boosted attendance at the opening night to well over 100 people, quite apart from the choir themselves, who numbered over 30. Commoners Choir, with no definite article or apostrophe, is a collective with a genuine commitment to change. As they say, they put the oi in choir as they wonder about the state of the nation. If you get a chance, go see them. They're a superb outfit, really talented. The show was a Friday to Saturday only affair, but because the project's online presence was strong by this time, with plenty of events to report, Room 103 attracted the attention of Dr. Lisa Mullen at Oxford University, who had acquired funding to create an Orwell-themed symposium. She had negotiated the use of 2 venues. An evening event took place at the Sultan Nasrin Shah Conference Centre, Worcester College, Oxford, another gear-grinding change of venue atmosphere for the project. A debate on the state of contemporary journalism took place in the conference hall and was followed by informal social drinks in the foyer outside, where video and a selection of 2-dimensional work was displayed on monitors and presentation screens. I find this one of the most telling images which the project has inadvertently thrown up so far. We are truly fiddling while Rome burns, or at least drinking Chardonnay while the earth around us screams. The following day, 6 papers on aspects of Orwell's work were delivered. The Room 103 mission statement provided the introduction for the printed programme. Through the following week, a larger showing of work was displayed in the reception area of the English Faculty Building of Oxford University, half a mile across town. The Orwell Society provided online support for the exhibition, which was greatly appreciated. As a result of this symposium, negotiations began to show 103 at Bournemouth University, and then the pandemic scuppered those plans, though the threads are being taken up again for a showing there in the near future. In the meantime, another exhibition opportunity presented itself in Narberth, which is a small but important town in Pembrokeshire. Oriel Q is run by artist volunteers, a small gallery with big ambitions. We live in a time when anniversaries and local connections govern the exhibition programmes of many public cultural venues. So presenting Room 103 to an audience in Wales faced two problems. One, as a result of COVID restrictions, we missed the date marking the 50th anniversary of George Orwell's passing back in 2020. And two, Orwell wasn't Welsh. He had few connections with Wales, although one was particularly significant. During a vacation in the cottage of Bulk Ochyn near Portmeirion, he discussed with Arthur Koestler the founding of a leftist committee, independent of any communist influence, to more effectively oppose the influence of Stalinism in Britain. No holiday small talk topic, I think you'll agree. So with these two obstacles in mind, special thanks go to Harriet Adderman and the committee of Oriel Q for accepting my submission regardless, and my gratitude extends to all the members who have given such enthusiastic and practical support to this project. Without their work, Narberth and its large Wild West hinterland, which this gallery serves, would be a far less culturally rich region. They strive to present exhibitions which make people think. One cannot live by landscapes and seascapes alone, no matter how technically accomplished they may be. Thankfully, there's a distinctive Welsh flavour to the lineup for this show. Paul Stephen Jones developed an abhorrence of social injustice, not by taking to the roads of London or cleaning in the kitchens of Paris, but by working for the Department of Social Security in a job centre plus, where, against the unwritten rules in operation there, he actually proactively assisted his clients to fill out the necessary forms to make successful claims. This willful independence of spirit and a burning anger against establishment mores stokes his poetry and his photography. Alan Purgas's work for the project has centred on the early warning stations based in North Yorkshire. Menwith Hill resembles a clutch of gigantic snake's eggs, housing radar equipment a few miles west of Harrogate, and the man-made gable of RAF Fylingdales on the moors leading towards Whitby rivals the austerity of any pyramid to be found in Egypt. They are impressive paintings and faintly sinister, exactly the effect transmitted by the buildings themselves. By contrast, the edifice is depicted in Neil Johnson's large 21st century Art Deco watercolours, although very similar to Alan's listening stations, suggest an atmosphere of optimism. These communications towers and pylons are there to promote constructive dialogue between people, states, and power blocks, keeping lines of communication open rather than shutting them down, as important now as ever they were, given the current state of play regarding Ukraine. Jacqueline Jones produces those isolated figures to which I am temperamentally drawn. They represent the little everyman, or every woman, the kind of person Orwell had in mind for his character of Winston Smith. If I were in a position to commission the book covers for a series of new volumes on Orwell's writings, I would probably use these. Mark Gibbs' work particularly interests me, as he and I have both utilised the concept of cryptic camouflage in nature completely independent of each other, and given our latest work the same title, with no communication having ever taken place between us. Mark's work has been exploring a contemporary response to the First World War. Recent work has turned to modern conflicts via the theme of birds and camouflage. He called his papier-mâché series of sculptures of nightjar pieces hiding in plain sight. The birds, using a phenomenon known as crypsis, pursue their existences largely unhindered by resembling something else entirely. They are not hiding, they have simply become invisible to their enemies. I investigated almost exactly the same phenomenon while documenting the variety of moths inhabiting my home area, attracting them using a light trap. My use of these creatures in my art is rather more overt, by embedding the faces of characters from 1984 into the cryptic patterning. Winston and Julia are hiding in plain sight. But two sides can play that same game. Charrington too may have blended into his surroundings, but he is watching and waiting while appearing to be something else, something other than an instrument of state surveillance, ready to expose his prey. I must say here that no nightjars or moths were harmed in the making of this art. Louise Weldon is an actress and performance artist who, with the group in which she performs, the Attic Players, based in Newcastle Emlyn in Wales, are developing a series of tableaux, especially for the Narberth show as we speak. They hope to present some of these live during the preview on the 18th of March, COVID restrictions permitting. In any event, they will be shown on the project video loop throughout the show's duration. So, this is our story so far. If anyone is able to attend the Narberth show, please do so, and do tell your friends and colleagues. And if anyone knows of a suitable venue for future outings, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Glenn. Could everybody unmute themselves and show your appreciation in the usual way?
Thank you.
That was really excellent, Glenn. Thanks very much. And while you were talking, various members of our audience were passing their appreciation in the notes down below in the chat feature.
Right. Oh, that's nice to hear.